What's up, book nerds? My name is Tara, and today I am going to do a review of The Troop by Nick Cutter. I'm doing this review as part of my commitment to the Book Riot's Read Harder Challenge in 2016. The very first item on the challenge is to read a horror novel, and so that's what this is for. I won't go into any spoilers with this review because I don't think most people have read this book, so I don't know that there's a lot of reason to go into that. But I do want to talk a little bit about just like a general review of the story because it's such a disgusting story. It is an adult horror novel, but I can see how this has been written to really have a lot of appeal to the YA audience because the story is centered around the boys in a Boy Scout troop who are going camping for the weekend on a remote island off of Prince Edward Island in Canada, and things don't exactly go as planned. You know, of course, we're set up on this island. There's not a phone line, and nobody's coming to pick them up until the end of the weekend. And a boat arrives with a man on the boat who is very, very ill. And since the Scoutmaster is a doctor, he pulls the man in, and they're going to try to help them because that's what good Boy Scouts do. And that ends up being the downfall because, as we all know, if you're alone in the middle of nowhere, someone extremely ill shows up, things are not going to go well. So what we have here is a biological contaminant that starts to infect everyone in the group. So not only do you have the horror of this illness that's attacking them all, but it starts to break down those group dynamics. So you also get a little bit of the Lord of the Flies type social situation going on between all of these boys. Out of everything that I've ever read, this is probably the only book that has completely made me just squirm and make like just gross like faces as I was reading. Kudos to Nick Cutter for just completely going the gross route. There were also two scenes in the novel that maybe weren't necessarily gross, and they made sense within the context of the novel, but they were absolutely horrifying. So when we're talking about horror, especially gross out types of horror, this book definitely horrified me. So this book uses three main types of storytelling. The first is your real-time narration of the events, starting with the boys arriving on the island and ending with the end of the story. The second is that throughout, especially the beginning of this narrative, there are a lot of flashbacks that give us information about the dynamics between the boys and the troop. So the flashbacks I didn't particularly care for because they got to be very cumbersome when I just wanted to know what was going to happen next in the story. And I felt some of them were a little bit self-indulgent on behalf of the author, that they were things that I didn't necessarily need to know, considering that the main point of this was that it was just supposed to be grossing me out. The third part of the narration, and the part that I actually loved the most, was every couple of chapters there would be some sort of additional material, whether it's reports or interviews or journal entries, newspaper articles surrounding the events that happened on the island. So because we are really only in the heads of these boys and kind of jumping around to what's happening in their world, we never really know what's happening off the island, how this man ended up on the island, and I was really glad that this story gave the opportunity to fill in some of that backstory, which actually became the most interesting part of this because ultimately this is a story about human nature and consumerism, corporate culture, things like that. So while I could have done without the flashback narrations, I was really glad that these extra pieces from the additional materials were thrown in there to enhance the story. As for the writing, as I've said, that it is extremely graphic, extremely gory. There's nothing to write home about in like the sentence level writing itself, except for that he really can give a good description of when things go very, very wrong in the human body. We're not talking poetic prose or anything, but he was effective in what he was trying to do with this. And finally, as for characterization in the novel, that would be another area where the story sort of fell flat for me. You start to get these stereotypical characters. Some of them did not always have believable motivations for the choices that they made. And there was one character in particular that I felt was just unrealistic and was written in more as a plot device rather than as a realistic character. So in that sense, I felt there were several really convenient points in this novel, as is probably the case with a lot of horror novels, because there's There's a reason that these things don't really happen in the real world. In order for us to write about them in fiction or read about them in fiction, we kind of have to have this perfect series of events that lead to things just going catastrophically wrong. And some of that means we have people who don't really read like real people because they're in there making things worse in some way or being a hero in some way that might not happen in the real world. So all of that set aside, I did end up giving The Troop a B because anything that actually effectively freaks me out is going to have to be given a little boost of a thumbs up for me. So while this might have just been a sort of average read to me, that's what pulled it up to a B. So if you can handle really gross outy types of things, if you like Stephen King, who is very clearly someone that Nick Cutter has borrowed a lot from and kind of paying respects to in this book, then I definitely recommend this novel. If you've read The Troop or any other disgusting horror novels that you think I might be interested in, or if you are also participating in the Book Riot Read Harder Challenge, let me know in the comments below. And as always, book nerds, I'll see you next time.